Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Chris Robbins. Chris is an entrepreneur, an innovator, a husband, a yoga instructor, a father, and the founder of Soul Degree. Professionally, Chris worked in the corporate world as an entrepreneur across Europe and then America in dozens of roles and responsibilities for 25 plus years, and realized most of that time was spent trying to prove his worth, hide his truth, or trying to be someone he wasn't. After hitting rock bottom and looking for purpose while navigating his healing journey, Chris created Soul Degree, a coaching and professional development program for men that offers monthly meditations and runs restorative wilderness retreats aimed at giving men the opportunity to step out of their everyday lives and experience adventure, freedom, and inner growth. Soul Degree allowed Chris the opportunity to rediscover a sequestered source of joy and slowing down and circling up with people in pursuit of deeper meaning in remote natural settings. So Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jalon.
I gave a bit of an introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
I sure can. Yeah. It's always pretty interesting to hear somebody else recounting your, snippets of your history. But I grew up just outside of New York. I'm the youngest of three boys, and I had a childhood that, honestly, looking back on it, was phenomenal. But like we often do, I slipped into 30 years of my life thinking that it was not so awesome. And then I think that therein lies probably some of the juicier topics that I'm sure we'll dive into in this conversation. But um, we lived in this suburban neighborhood. My mom and dad were both working. They were both going in and out of the city. My dad was in the ad business, advertising executive. And my mom actually started her own company when I was young, like 6 or 7. She was in the location scout business. She was finding these locations she was basically knocking on doors and photographing private residences and commercial businesses and portfolioing, putting them into portfolio, and then calling the movie companies or the commercial production houses and seeing if they needed various locations. And so they were both away, as many were, I guess, back in the day. I don't know if I think it is less and less a phenomenon, although you talk about dual income households today, it seems like both husband and wife or mother and father are working. But that certainly was the case for me as a young kid. And so I spent a load of time alone. My older brothers were just older enough such that they were off doing things far more mature than I needed to be doing. And so it was kind of every man for himself. And I think those years of being alone at the time felt isolating, and I think they left me feeling like I had to prove something. And but it was, like I said, being outside, running through the woods, doing a lot of shooting hoops and riding bikes and playing every sport I could get my hands on, from stickball to football to soccer, and also largely making my own breakfast, lunch, and dinner until my parents would come home. And and then I had a sudden turn of events in high school. My dad he got promoted, and they asked him to move to London over in England. And I did not take well to that news. I kind of felt like I was comfortable in the little bubble that I was living in. And but we went, and I was, because my two older brothers, they were already in college, so I was the only one that went over there with my mom and dad. I went to an American school over there, and it was transformative, mostly on just a sort of widening of the aperture on life and recognizing that there is a world beyond suburban New York. Uh, it really, it really opened my eyes, and um, I had a very international experience. It's kind of the way it rolls over in Europe. You, instead of going over two, three towns over, you're going, you're crossing a country border to go compete in a football game or whatever you're doing. And and that experience set me up to come back to American university. So I came back to the U.S. and um, I went to school up in northern Vermont, the University of Vermont. Our family had always been growing up skiing up there, and that just seemed to be a decision I made largely based on geography, not anything else. And uh, went back to Europe after college for a few years. Was in the hospitality business. I was guiding um, bike trips over in France, and I was also working in the commodity business as a gas trader. And then came back to the U.S. And that's kind of where, you mentioned sort of getting on a train and taking it somewhere where I probably shouldn't have gone. That's kind of where it all began there, is that I, at a young age of 23, 24, having had some great experience, I had it in my head that I just needed to do like what my dad was doing. Not necessarily be an advertising executive, but be somebody who played the part, wore the suit, carried the briefcase, went to some corporate environment, and that was, I think I took it upon myself without asking any questions, uh, as maddening as that is, that was that was what I was supposed to do. It was my obligation. There wasn't really I mean, these days we ask our kids. I mean, I think we kick every single door so wide open and have them consider so many different options, and repeatedly tell them not to try to be like their parents because of the lemming like approach that at least I took as a kid, thinking like I just needed to be like my dad. And so I went on and spent 25, 30 years in corporate America through various jobs, and moderate success, but always unhappy. And then decided at one point, all my problems would be solved if I went into the restaurant business. So I left corporate America, and having never waited a table before in my entire life, I decided with a partner that we should open a restaurant, of all things, right? Piece of cake. And there were a lot of reasons that I had there justifying why this was a good choice. And honestly, looking back on it, it was a good choice in some respects. It delivered on all of the sort of experiential elements I was looking for in my quote unquote day job. And I learned an absolute ton, and we made a lot of people happy, a lot of customers happy. We had a great product. We we made a lot of good decisions, but we made a lot of bad decisions also. And after 10 years, I found myself in a heap, as many people do coming out of the restaurant business, because it does beat you up. But mostly my sort of pile of um, my darkness was largely self-induced by way of just thinking that I had failed. I didn't look at it like, oh, good job, man. You made it happen for 10 years. You served thousands of customers. You generated millions of dollars. You opened 7 restaurants. You had a wholesale business, and we're in Whole Foods and BJ's, and like you crushed it on all fronts. But we borrowed $6 million from friends and family over the years, and all of that was not returned. We ended up selling off our locations one by one, and I got out of the business because I was mentally, emotionally, psychologically ruined, and also just looking for answers in all the wrong places, but most notably in the bottle. And I just, I I wore that failure on my sleeve in a way that I'm not really that proud of. Um, I would have loved to have interpreted it a different way at the time, but I didn't. I felt like, we almost lost the house. We had tons and tons we had piled $800,000 of my own money into the business. It was a lot of public exposure in our community around this not going the way we wanted it to. And so I allowed it to hit me hard, and it drove me into a bad way. And I think that's kind of where where the where that where that long fight ended. Um, but that was the culmination of me just slowly um, coming out of this shame and guilt of feeling like I had done wrong. I lost my father in the middle of it, which was kind of ironic because I didn't really know at the time that all these career decisions I had been making were largely to not just please him, but to seek out love from him. Because even though I had a loving childhood, he was never around. He was just physically and emotionally absent all the time, like many fathers were. And even when he was around, he probably had 2, 3 martinis in him. And he was still a wonderful guy. There was no obvious surface level trauma that I had incurred. But looking back on it, clearly the trauma was being alone or feeling, alone, and missing out on having an experience with my dad that left me feeling loved by him or acknowledged by him. And, he's looking down on us right now, and he knows that I know at this point he did everything he could possibly have done and then some to help me turn out. But at the time, for all those years, I was like thinking that the next job was going to get me on his radar, and he was going to suddenly acknowledge me and say, attaboy or good job or whatever it was. And so I was making all of these career decisions for all the wrong reasons. And so I learned that. I learned that the hard way. I learned that coming out of even realizing that the restaurant business was, some of it was a choice from the heart, but I think there was a lot of it in there that I thought, well, if I just become an entrepreneur, then I'll kill it. Everything will be great. And And hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod. My subconscious is saying, maybe your dad will actually pick up on the success. But then he died, like right in the middle of it, and I did not grieve his death at all. I didn't even occur to me what grief was at the moment. He died of cancer. It took him like 18 months, so we had plenty of time to talk and say goodbye and all that stuff. So I told myself I felt complete when he left us, but I was not. And I did not grieve his loss. And I just poured myself back into the restaurant business, which was the worst decision I probably could have made. Because I think I probably made some bad choices along the way as a result of that, not even knowing it. And um, so that hurt, and that was another thing that I think once I kind of started to come out of the fog, I uh, I think that rebirth a little bit ironically happened by way of being a father in a way that I had, and it wasn't how like most of us are like, hey, I'm never going to be like my dad, or I'm never going to be like my mom, or it wasn't even conscious for me because he was a good dude. I mean, people liked him, respected. So I didn't have really any of that, except that I found myself where Mel's career was taking off. I was in the gutter, and we decided for the first time, rather than kind of be two, entrepreneurs juggling everything equally, that I would assume complete responsibility for the kids and the family and the house and what have you, and sort of become that first call parent. And she would take over and just focus exclusively on taking care of the financial piece of our team. And that was also just a complete kick in the balls because I didn't really know how to take that culturally. It was just so off base for me to be the guy doing that or to accept that role. Even though I wanted to be with my kids more, it still felt like not only have you lost people's money and failed in the corporate world, but here you are now taking kids to the doctor in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Like you are the complete, utter epitome of a failure is kind of what I told myself briefly. But then I started to I started to have a few moments where I noticed that there was an opportunity to be there emotionally for my kids or to throw the ball, or that, maybe being the guy taking them off the bus wasn't such a bad thing. Not because I uh, needed that for my own ego, but that I realized, wow, this is another way to be a dad, is to be physically and emotionally present. And that's where I think I realized that my dad had not been. So it was almost like I learned it after the fact as opposed to seeing it, in front of me and making a conscious decision to change it. It occurred almost just through the experience of being a dad and finding myself in the company of my kids in a way that I would have never thought I would have been in that position, nor would I have ever thought, at least in the early years, that was a respectable place to be. And so, but it was in the front end of that that I also just stopped to, I guess, be conscious of what was really missing for me. And being in nature or like playing outside or being in the woods or, camping, these kinds of things I did as a kid. And I sort of recognized that they had long been forgotten. Um, I also missed kind of, and I'm not really sure where I got this. Maybe it was through my brotherhood with my own brothers, or but I had good friends in high school and good buddies in college, but there was something about just like being together with a group of men only and knowing that um, a different kind of um, guard gets let down when you're just in the company of men. And, obviously other guards go up because we're just such there can be, the macho masochistic, prideful ways that we sometimes exude. But I miss that. And I also recognize at this stage of my life that um, I just really would rather have a conversation um, that goes deeper than what we're often talking about. And that's not to belittle the kitchen table talk or, what's the score of the game kind of conversation. But I don't know, just wasn't really like if I was going to have a chat, I wanted to get in there. And so a lot of these things kind of came together that had me conceive of this idea called Soul Degree, which was uh, selfishly an outlet I was seeking for myself, where I could go and get away from everything and slow down time a little bit and light a fire or go for a hike and not be constrained by time or, God forbid, judgment or um, dishonesty or all these things that sometimes we sort of are facing every day, but where there was just freedom to be. And in some cases, just freedom to be like a kid running through the mud in the woods and, you know, slapping the stick down the fence kind of thing. Like just like that, maybe that visual that you would have of a youthful exuberance. And so this is the genesis of Soul Degree and how it came together. Um, and today, after 7 or 8 years, it is something that I've done, dozens of times. I don't do a lot of them, these retreats. They're 5 days, 4 nights, 12 guys. And I keep it intimate for a reason because, like I said, it allows me the opportunity to participate, and also that's just a good number to be able to get to everyone and get connected with everyone in that period of time. And I have hosted these kind of around the country, but Vermont has definitely been an anchor point for many of these retreats, partially because it's in my backyard, but also because it's just an awesome state. Excuse me. It's gorgeous. The seasonality and the changes of it is dynamic, and um, it's off the beaten track for a lot of people. Most people are flying up and down, the freeway from New York to Boston, but anything north of that is not always visited. And so Vermont tends to be one of those places that is kind of special for people. And so these have been very transformational retreats and something I'm so honored to be a part of and to be, yeah, the host of. But like I said, I don't profess to be the guy with the answers. I I don't go and necessarily lead the retreats as much as I do host them. And like I said, I'm rolling up my sleeves and using the time for myself because God knows we could all use a few days off the grid and out of our everyday lives to sort a few things out. So I I certainly have had the good fortune of sitting with many, many men at either retreat or in some coaching situations. Um, and I learn a lot from those. So it gives me maybe some broader perspective in that respect, but no means am I am I now some wise old man with answers? I'm 1,000% learning as we go, um, and appreciative of that, because I think in our early years we're not appreciative of that. We maybe find ourselves on steep learning curves complaining, whereas I think maybe with time and never hurts to have a good solid midlife crisis in the middle, but all of that is is useful in recognizing that, at least for me, like I see there's I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg, but I'm grateful for that.
Sure.
So that's a little bit about where I'm at. I currently live in Vermont, which was not the case. I was living and raising my kids in Boston, Massachusetts for 25 years, but just before COVID, we decided to come up here, and we bought my mom's house, and she lives nearby, and it's nice to be near her as she's getting older. And my three kids are almost all gone. I got a 25-year-old who's traveling around the world at the moment, or around Southeast Asia anyway, and another one that's in the music business, trying to be a singer-songwriter. And then I've got a 18-year-old son who, the first two are daughters, and then I've got an 18-year-old son who has another year of high school before he makes his way. We're not sure what direction. So it's about to get quiet around here in the spring, July.
Oh man. Thank you for sharing that. That was quite a story and very captivating. And I saw myself a lot in your story, especially when you mentioned that you didn't necessarily have a situation that was what would have outwardly appeared bad per se, but I guess now being able to look back and see that maybe you didn't have enough of the things that you were looking for or that you needed as a child, because um, I've heard it said that trauma can be too much of something or even too little of it. And to be trying to find your way on your own as a child can be difficult. It can. And I think a lot of us growing up, when our parents were busy and we were maybe latchkey kids, or we just didn't have the nurture and support that we needed, and not for any other reason than our parents were doing their best to take care of us, could have given us a little bit of, we missed out on some things. We missed out on things that would have helped us in our development. Um, and so to hear you say those things, and to recognize, to be able to recognize that, you know what, I had a decent childhood, but also there were some things that I was missing, I think takes a little bit of awareness, for sure. So I'm glad that you mentioned that you're able to see it, and I think that others will be able to relate to that as well.
I think the hard part also that, I just picked up on the other day, it's like we went through our moments where it was a struggle as kids, and, my mom and dad are trying to make it. And, of course, whatever family or, sort of generational experience your own parents have around things like money can influence the behavior that the parent exhibits. And for my dad, for whatever reason, he always left me with the impression that I was wrong to ask. Wrong to ask for anything, really, whether it was a candy bar or, you name it. And he didn't do it in a jerky kind of way, but that was my interpretation. And so I think as I got older, and even in processing some of this stuff, it felt like a hurdle for me to even be able to say, yeah, my childhood was good and I could have used some more of this, that, or the other. Because even that seems a little bit, I don't know, egoic, where you're still looking for more. Come on, what more could there have been? The childhood was good. Clothes on your back and food on the plate, and plenty of cool experiences, education, etc. I mean, and so, but it took me a while to think that, yeah, no, that's true. And there were some things that I left subject to interpretation, and for better or for worse, that hurt me in the moment. I'm growing from it now.
I agree. And I think that for our parents, they were trying to do better than maybe what they had experienced in their family systems or in their childhood. So for them, being able to provide a roof over our heads, shoes on our feet, and food on the table, that may have been something that they didn't get in the same manner in which they were providing it. So, I always heard you should be grateful, or, this, that, and the third. Anytime I questioned anything, or anytime I felt like there was something more that I wanted, it was, well, why don't you appreciate what you have? Which, like you said, made me feel off for asking for other things, even if it was help. I was taught to be self-sufficient. God bless the child to have his own. You don't bother other people with your problems. And like you said, I think that now being able to look back, I did need my thinking challenged with some of that and some of those areas.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's even in parenting teenagers and 20 somethings, it's so natural for us to think that our children are seeking an answer. And at the same time, everybody knowing that there is no silver bullet, but still that it's natural tendency of a parent to try to give an answer or show them the guardrails or whatever. And the reality is, man, you gotta you gotta you gotta live and learn it yourself. I remember my older brother taught me how to ride a bike, but he didn't teach me. It's like the bikes where you like use the foot pedals for the brakes. But he didn't teach me how to use the brakes. He just taught me how to ride the bike. So I got balance. I'm like going. This is great. So I take off. I ride all the way to the school, and I come back. On the way back from school, there's this massive downhill,
Oh man.
and I get on this downhill realizing I don't even know how to put the brakes on this thing. So sure enough, the handlebars cross. I go flying
Oof.
and, smear my face across the concrete. Like, I come up all bloody. I got to go to the hospital. But that's the way you got to learn how to sometimes use the brakes. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's hard for a parent to uh, tell their kids what not to do or how to do. They just got to learn it.
Yeah, that's true.
And our parents too, to your point, like they they only knew what they knew. They only could do what they could do, and um, it seems to take a lifetime sometimes to figure that piece out and come to accept and empathize and have some compassion or forgive or all of the above.
Yeah, indeed. I remember talking about my childhood and my family system with my therapist, and she said, "Well, your parents were human too. Your parents were your age every time you were that age." And she said something that stood out to me the most was that you can't teach what you don't know. And I think hearing that allowed for me to have so much compassion, because it allowed for duality. I could have had my experience and felt like I needed more, but also they could have been doing the best that they knew how to do and the best that they could at the moment. And being able to accept those two realities allowed for me to, kind of walk a straighter line when it came to how I saw my experience and how I saw them. And I was able to see them as humans and have a lot of compassion and understanding. And I think our relationship grew once I was able to experience that, especially um, with just the way I interacted based on things that I thought that I was incorrect in my thinking.
Yeah. No, it's true. And it's kind of refreshing how, my mom's 86 and, she's got three boys that are in their 50s. And it's easy to just decide, oh, well, there's nothing more for her to learn.
Mm.
But the reality is, as a mother of three boys, your job's never over and you're always learning. Just like she didn't know how to parent, 340 somethings. Now she doesn't know how to parent, 350 somethings. So there's always a little bit of that evolution that goes on both sides. And it sort of never ends, that there's a brief moment where your kids maybe leave the house to go to school or something where you might think, oh, okay, my job is really done. But, but of course it's never done.
Never done. Never done. You're right. Something else that you mentioned and that I touched on a bit when I was introducing you was that your behaviors were affected by some of the pain you were experiencing. What sort of challenges did you face when, I guess I could say, things caught up to you?
I mean, the 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 treatment of my perceived system or symptoms was just addictions, chewing tobacco, smoking pot, drinking alcohol, like all these things to sort of just mask the pain, which I was oblivious to anyway. I was not aware of being in pain. I was constantly trying to solve the problem on my own. And but I would say that, some of the, maybe a direct answer to your question, like what did I run into is just, um, a constant, uh, I guess a never ending experience of hiding or running away. Um, and sure, sometimes I would run away by way of drinking too much booze. So it's literal and figurative in that respect. But I mean, like running and hiding from my reality, like the things that I was unhappy about or the bad choices that I was making. I was for just sort of in a perpetual state of denial without knowing I was denying these things. So, and that, I think that coincidentally uh, contributed to what had been a long-standing sense of feeling alone. And I didn't know that. But,
Hmm.
when you
Wow.
feel like you have failed at taking investor dollars and turning them into two or three times what you had originally gotten, or you you feel like you've done wrong to your wife or your family, or all these things help add thickness to the walls around you. And if you're not talking about it, just like you found a lot of freedom um, from letting some of this stuff off your own chest into the ears of somebody who is listening, uh, it makes a big difference when you're when you're not trying to just do it all on your own or hold it all inside. I think guys are just, I don't know. I hate to make sweeping generalizations, but I do think that men are far far more effective at holding it all inside and trying to do it themselves. Of course, it's influenced by our own culture and upbringing, and you're supposed to be the provider and the strong guy and this, that, and the other. But I I do think that like we're adept at keeping it all up in our head or our heart, and that can have real detrimental effects on the mind and body, as it did for me. And of course, pouring, things like alcohol is just gas on the fire. It doesn't help anything.
I think as men, we do tend to try and just carry as much as we can without ever having to feel the need to ask for help or talk to someone. I know that for me, I've always felt like the more that I can bear, the stronger that I am. And that was kind of my culture and what I saw modeled growing up as well. So it was never it was never a thing to ask for help, or men don't cry, and you never let them see you down. That type of macho mentality is what I was always privy to seeing. So that was what I learned. And I think culturally, it's just something that we all kind of do because, we see it in the movies, we see the athletes, and um, it's just something that I feel like is so deeply ingrained in us as men that being vulnerable or sensitive is viewed as a weakness or as something that's just not popular for the most part.
I'm desperate to know whether that needle is moving. I mean, I feel like I'm a little bit, um, I'm ill-equipped to answer that question as to whether or not there really is a across the board a leveling up of consciousness and even an acceptance or more acceptance among men that bottling it all up doesn't serve us. And I read about it and I see it, and I'm chin deep in an industry that is open and honest about the potential benefits from doing that. But I I'm I'm also pretty clear that uh, I'm I'm not probably equipped to represent myself as part of the entire populace. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and I mean, it does seem like, yes, with our own growth and development and the passage of time comes higher consciousness, but this piece about uh, being a man and what that definition is, and who defines what masculine tendencies or not, and are we putting vulnerability in there as one of the the same character traits as being strong or resilient or what, insert masculine word here.
Right. I think the conversations are happening. So I would say that in my opinion, the needle is moving. Um, it may not be moving as fast as I would like to see it moving, but I do see, even in circles that I thought I would never see guys talking about certain things. I see it happening because there's so much relief and healing to unburdening all the pain that you're carrying, things that you've had to endure in silence. And I think that when what maybe one person can take the lead in showing that it's necessary, and it's something that provides us with a path to freedom, that if someone sees it and they say, well, oh, well, well, I think he's a cool guy, or I respect him. If he's doing it, then maybe there's something to it, So, and that may not be all across the board everywhere, but I do think it's happening. I mean, even you talking about your journey, or me talking about mine, we're men talking about things that are vulnerable, and I think that
Mm.
the more that happens, the more it will become something that is commonplace and will allow for others to see it being modeled, and to want to do it as well.
Well, as I described a little bit, I would say, a lot of it used to be uh, measured by dollar signs. And I think, at least for me, maybe they're measured more by heart emojis or actual um, heartfelt emotions. Um, Even tears, like I never really resisted crying because I grew up with a father that did express his own emotions from time to time. He did not always, but you'd see him, like, he would visibly get emotional from time to time, and that made it okay for me. But I think even like that happens to me daily, and I I no longer kind of attribute that with failings or uh, a sense of feeling downtrodden or sad or any, like, it's, to me, it's more of a measurement of success in that I'm tapped in, I'm aware, I'm sensing something emotionally or energetically that I'm alert enough to pick up on and maybe even be emotional over. And so I also think that a sign of success for me is that, uh, and also I think a real pretty consistent trait amongst men is that just that today I'm okay waking up and declaring that there are some things I can and will do for myself, and allow that to be okay. Because forever I was looking outside of myself. I was seeking outside validation, anything from any external source, and subsequently being a people pleaser, always trying to, like, make them happy, or do the right thing for the other person, and never looking within, never actually asking myself, well, what do I need, what's important to me, what am I thinking. It was never like, what I was thinking was secondary, if not 10th in line. And I think that I guess I would say that part of what makes me feel a little bit more successful today is just recognizing that I do have needs too, and it's okay to express them and pursue them. Um, and that's that's a big deal for me, and I think a big deal for some guys, where they just put their head down and they go do whatever they're doing, and they do it exceptionally well, and they're making a lot of people happy around them, family and friends and colleagues. And but then, they pick their head up 50 years later and think, holy, like, where did I go?
Hmm.
Or, what have I missed out on for me? um, maybe a natural progression, but that certainly feels like a sign of more success to me. Um, and it sounds cliche, but just uh, feeling a degree of contentment in being where I am and knowing that whatever water has flown under the bridge over the last 50 something years is the water. And there's hopefully going to be another 50 years of water that's going to flow under the bridge. And being at ease with knowing that I can't, there's no point in judging the water that's already passed by, but just appreciating it and also knowing that it's going to flow how it's going to flow going forward. And that's not to say that I'm not in control per se, but I think just there is a degree to which, as I'm sure you know, like the more you grip something, the more elusive it becomes. And so to think that, uh, now I'm 53 and I'm so much wiser and smarter and grown up and I've learned all these things that, it's all going to be good from here on out is sort of laughable.
Mm.
And I, so I guess to your question about success, I think I, I appreciate feeling like there's no place to get to, but just the opportunity to enjoy what is becoming, what is happening, who I am becoming, and who the people around me are becoming, because that is definitely that that's just a headwind that we all have to breathe
Mm.
into.
I love the approach and the outlook that you have now, because it's so true that just awareness, or being able to look at your friends and family and just be able to appreciate them for who they are and appreciate yourself for who and where you are, and not measuring success based on dollar signs or achievement, or any of those things, because it's all fleeting. And when we really stop and look at the things that matter most, I think that that's what your experience has allowed you to see and now get to. And you can't really put a price on that at all. So I'm grateful for you to be able to share your wisdom and your knowledge, based on the experiences that you've gone through, because I think it will allow for others to maybe be able to look and say, okay, well, if he did all of that and now this is where he says happiness and success is, then others may not need to take those same pathways and get beaten up a little bit just to come back to the same place where we're saying these things are now, without having to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a date that I wanted to ask you about, and that date is August 24th, 1996. What is what is that date, and what was it like?
Got married that day. We were on the we were in the front yard tennis court and the backyard of Mel's parents' place in Western Michigan, and it was. I mean, Mel and I have been together almost 30 years, and it has not been without its disasters along the way, for sure. But I think neither of us would have it any other way, as much as there were moments where we were both ready to probably kill each other. Um, but you can't predict any of that. I mean, even at the altar, nobody tells you they don't tell you the gory details of what it's like to have to commit to somebody and try to every single day wake up and quote unquote work on the marriage. I mean, if people really thought about it like that, they probably would be getting married less. But it does take a lot of work. And so, but that day was special for a couple of reasons. One was that it was very different. We didn't expect anybody to come to Michigan because it was sort of out there, and so we invited a bunch of people, and uh, for whatever reason, they all decided to take it upon themselves to take a trip to Michigan, then in the middle of nowhere, and so there was a lot more people there than I remember expecting. Um, I'll never forget. It's kind of weird, but instead of inviting people to like throw rice or flowers or whatever, we gave people little bottles of bubbles. So
Mhm.
people were blowing bubbles all over the place, which I remember sort of visually being a very memorable part of the day. As many wedding days go, they're like over in 2 seconds flat. So there's these brief things that I do look back fondly on. We had a lot of our friends participate in the wedding in different ways, uh, but mostly like speaking their own words, their own truth. And so it was very cool just being able to sit in the crowd and listen to 5 or 6 of our good friends either sing a song or tell a story, or because we didn't give them, we weren't giving them passages to read or telling them what to do. We just said, hey, we'd love to hear from you. Um, and that included my dad. My dad wrote a really moving poem about family that had uh, many, many deep meanings that I don't even think he necessarily knew he was penning. He was very poetic in his way, and he used to sort of pen a lot of limericks and stuff like that. So he was good at it. But I think this topic of family caught him his own self by surprise, and still to this day, it's something that I read that, um, like I was saying, was ahead of his time because I think his thought and focus for so many years was being a provider and being a corporate man, and many of us didn't necessarily feel the the family essence of him, but it was there, and it came out in that poem. It was very moving. Good day though. Glad to have found Mel. She's a good egg.
All right, another question I want to ask. Mel Robbins is likely a household name nowadays. And I know that it can be difficult for some men to be the husband of somebody who is so famous. Do you ever struggle with her success, and why or why not?
Um, I think the main struggle with her success is in moments where I just want more of her time. I want more of her presence. Uh, the thing about Mel is her success is so inspiring, even to myself, but obviously to many people out there. They love to hear what she has to say. It's um, so knowing how fulfilled she is in doing her work makes it all okay. Um, I think that maybe what's behind some of that question is like, how does somebody, do you feel like you're in the shadow? Sometimes people ask, like, is there, and I felt that in the early days. It wasn't even really shadow. It was more of a concern actually, because I knew Mel was smart. I knew that she would go places and do things, but it was maybe more of a an insecure feeling that I needed to stay close to that for fear that it, or in this case, she, might just eclipse me and move on. Because when you're living with the sentiment of I'm not quite good enough, which was definitely my narrative for many years, um, you can you can you can allow that to sort of dominate and have it fuel that insecurity or lack of confidence. But I think the I think the reason why I'm still standing here is that Mel has had a lot of that herself over the years, and neither she nor I knew about our respective paths, or I should say our mindsets, or our emotional or psychological misgivings, if you will. We were learning it as we went, but there were many, many instances where in her career, the shit was hitting the fan from every direction, and she too was feeling very similar emotions. And so I think that uh, I we've ham and egged it really well together. Let's put it that way. And in many instances where I needed somebody to prop me up, she was there. And in many instances, I was there for her. And to this day, still continue to be there. Like I will say, it takes something to uh, try to be a source for someone else, and to really
Sure.
feed a fire without it getting in the way of your relationship or getting in the way of your own ego. And I think, Mel and I also, we worked together for 10 years, maybe even 15 actually, where I was kind of the guy behind the curtains doing everything that she wasn't doing. Both because she didn't want to be doing it, but also because she was incapable of doing it. And all those that expertise and those skills, the operational stuff, the financial stuff, that was my strength. So we definitely worked very well together for the time period that we did, and it came at an appropriate time in her own career trajectory until it was not working. And fortunately, we could see that ahead of ourselves a little bit, that we knew if we carried on in that husband and wife, business partner, team dynamic for too long, that it was going to crush our marriage. And so we anticipated that. And it got a little rough around the edges there toward the end, but we managed to find a way to ultimately sort of extrapolate myself from the business so that I could not be her business partner, but just be her cheerleader. And thank God that happened, because if we had not recognized that for ourselves, I think our marriage would probably not be in a very good state right now. Just because it's hard, it's hard to collapse those two things and think that you can find um, you can find the right balance, because over time I think it can have its way.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that you two are doing a great job of managing it based on just hearing how you've described it and being able to have the foresight and the wherewithal to know that, hey, we can't keep at this for long. Otherwise, we're going to jeopardize what's most important, and that's your bond and your marriage. So I thought that was a really important question to ask because, I mean, in the media, you see, couples who are famous or who are in the limelight or who are doing big things. Sometimes they can't do that and maintain a marriage because egos get in the way, or just so many things. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, so we talked about soul degree, where it, how it was born, what it is. What would a soul degree experience look like for someone who's interested? Let's say there's a group of guys that are looking for, a healing experience or a healing journey, and they decide
Hmm.
that they want to be a part of soul degree. What would it look like?
Well, I think that you gotta you gotta want to have a desire to be in the company of another dozen men whom you don't know, who are there
Mm,
for a for their own reasons, um, some of which are personal, but who are there to discover more about themselves through the lens of other people. Because that's often what happens is that you know, you come on this retreat and I make it very clear that you are there to open your senses up, open yourself up really to anything and everything, to try on new things, be them conversations or food or even behaviors for that matter. Um, and I am there to open doors to different ways to experience that, whether it's practicing yoga, which we do every morning, and whether it's a bunch of different types of meditations that I will expose people to a somatic or holotropic breathwork session that is very different and can be cathartic and releasing, to obviously hiking, getting into the woods, getting muddy, like I was saying, just having fun that way. But even doing things like uh, being conscious of practicing some gratitude along the way, doing that around a dining room table with 12 guys, it's a little different for people,
yeah.
but profound and powerful. Um,
Mm.
so these are some of the things that do go on. I mean, I do facilitate a handful of conversations, but a lot of the sharing and a lot of the knowledge transfer or the breakthroughs, so to speak, occur amongst the men themselves who are there. That has a lot to do with the fact that the people that show up really want to be there.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer that the people that show up are there for a reason, and that they need to be and deserve to be there for whatever it is that's going on in their life or wherever they are on their path. And so I also, I don't know, it's a little woo woo and hokey of me, but some people sign up and then they can't make it. They have to back out and there's cancellations and stuff like that. And I'm sort of the belief that this when the when the day comes and the stars show appear in the sky, whoever's sitting around the fire that first night are the people that deserve or need to be there. um, and that makes a big difference when people are of that headspace when they show up, because there's a real desire to pour oneself in to whatever they're there to get out of it, which is always different too. Like what you came for is going to be different than what I come for, and the same thing for the next guy. And that's good. So you may be going in there thinking, "Oh, I got to fix my marriage. I hope everybody that's there has a broken marriage so I can talk to them about that." But often you glean insights into your marriage by conversing with some guy about his dying mother. And like you never really know where these conversations are going to take you, but they often seem to find their way into what is ultimately of interest to you. It's usually pretty. it's pretty profound in the moment. And there, there's things that you learn or takeaways that you have that feel transformational in the moment. But it's also not the real world. And so a lot of the value in the retreat, if you will, is in the way in which you choose to integrate some of your learning. And one guy said to me, he said, this experience was amazing. And he said, it just changed my thinking by a degree or two. But then he went on to explain, if you just change your direction by a degree or two, over time, if you keep walking in that direction, like you are way, way far away from where you would have originally ended up. And he was being a little cute in tying it back to the word degree in the soul degree, but he meant it. And it is true. Like it's kind of one of those things where, every single problem that you have or issue or whatever, like it doesn't get solved overnight, but it really has a unique way of stirring up the pot in such a way that you can see things differently, you can hear things differently, both internally and externally. I think there's a somebody said, I really feel like I just spent 5 days looking into the eyes of humanity.
Wow.
So
That's big.
They got that through 12 guys, each with their own different story or situation. And if you can walk away with that, I mean, you can walk into any situation, whether it's the boardroom or the grocery store, and take a very different approach to how you go about your day.
Agreed. I would be, I mean, you couldn't tell me anything if I put together a retreat and one of the guests, that was his feedback. Like I would feel like I was saving the world, man. So for you to be able to hear things like that, it's big, Chris. It is. I don't want you to feel like what you're doing isn't something that is hugely valuable. Because I know that there weren't things like this around when I needed them, especially where I was living or where I grew up or with the guys that were in my circle. Like, we had community, we had basketball, we had sports, and we had going out, having fun, drinking, but and that was how we maintained a level of mental health. But I don't think there was ever times where we really got deep and vulnerable and emotional because we just didn't know how. So I'm grateful for what you're doing. I think you are moving the needle, changing the trajectory of how men look at vulnerability and what we're able to do and be, as far as what we think we have to carry, or just challenging our thinking and things that we may have been taught culturally, socially, whatever. So for me to you, thank you.
Well, thank you. I love what I do. It's an honor. I feel like it's a privilege. And I have made a conscious choice to touch 24 guys a year, at least through the retreats. There's some other online programs and stuff that I'm slowly beginning to offer. But I would turn it back on you and say, for you and the platform that you have and what you're trying to spread wide and far through your podcast is equal, if not more profound, because you're getting it out there into the ears of people, and that's seriously meaningful. So thank you.
I appreciate that so much. That was received. Um, Okay, I want to ask you one last thing. If you could use your platform to encourage anyone who may be struggling, who may have gone through some hard things and doesn't know what to do or where to turn, what would you say?
Well, I'm going to make an assumption there that that person is feeling really stuck and lost or lonely or alone. And so I guess my answer would be to speak up and to not let fear keep their mouth shut. Because it's through the act of saying what's on your mind to people that you feel like you can confide in or trust that you begin to I think you begin to shift your own narrative. But as long as you're holding it all inside and thinking you can figure it out yourself or that you have no options, these are uh, these will lead you into dead ends for sure. And so I would just encourage um, I would encourage men to seek out connection through any means. Um, Maybe it's to other men, it's okay to other women, older, younger, but connection, human connection. And I think the other thing that I would also just encourage really anybody, but guys, and I learned this through my own bouts of depression, which I didn't realize I was necessarily even experiencing depression. But I think the biggest culprit of feeling lost, stuck, depressed, what have you, is that we don't do a great job of keeping promises to ourselves. The simple ones, um, when you're going to get up, or what you're going to eat, or um, how you choose to put your left sock on before your right sock, or what, they can be the sort of most meaningless or seemingly meaningless things to the most significant. People talk about morning routines as being powerful. And I believe that. Even if your morning routine is, I wake up at this time and I brush with my left hand and I floss the upper left corner of my mouth and I only drink a half a cup of coffee, and that's your routine. Like, doing that consistently will enable you to go to bed at night feeling good about having kept promises to yourself. And I think that often we talk a big game or we have big dreams or visions, and we're not holding ourselves accountable to some of the little things that we need to do each day to move in that direction. And that's the biggest source of our feeling stuck or alone or depressed. Uh, so I think start small would be my encouragement, but choose a few things that are things that you can stick to and keep doing day in and day out. Ideally, things that you like doing also. Like, if you like basketball and you want to play more basketball, well, promise yourself to go play more basketball and actually do it. Um, but it's in the promise and the keeping of it that we thrive. And I think it's easy to lose sight of the big vision, like, oh, I want to do this big thing and this is my 5-year plan. But I would argue that the 24-hour plan and what you're going to do inside of it is way more important because that's all you got anyway.
Thank you for that, man. That was deeply inspiring and motivational. Um,
Mhm.
Thank you for this, Chris. Like I've had an amazing time sharing space with you and listening to you share your story, and listening to you share your wisdom and knowledge. So I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity, and very glad that we were able to connect and do this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me and putting the work in advance and giving me lots of lead time. Always helpful for sure. Um, I, I appreciate being here and let me know how this thing is going out so I can put it out myself.
I will for sure. If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you, and where can they find Soul Degree?
Yeah, it's souldegree.com on the web, and it's Soul Degree on Instagram. At this point, I actually think it's Soul Degree on Facebook as well. Um, it used to be Soul Degree Retreats on Facebook, but I think Soul Degree at this point, after 8+ years or whatever it's been, you can those are the spots mostly. I'm not on. I there is a Soul Degree page on LinkedIn, um, so you can find me there too, but mostly Instagram and Facebook and on the web.
Gotcha. All right. Well, again, man, I appreciate your time. Appreciate what you're doing, trying to provide a platform for men to have healthy outlets where they can come together and have community and express themselves and unburden, and move that needle ever so forward, even if it's ever so slowly. So thank you again for your time, for what you do, for who you are, for how you do it.
Appreciate you, Jalon. Thank you so much.